Hi everyone! In this video, I will be talking about how I found out about my own having autism and how I got my diagnosis of autism. Now, I had never really known what autism consisted of until I turned 16 and did some research into it for the purpose of creating an autistic character. At that time, I could not see how that the symptoms of autism reflected in myself. I personally never thought that I had autism until one of my family members brought it up to me and said, I did some research into Asperger's and I feel like you may have it. Now, you may be wondering why she did this research into Asperger's and autism in general, and that was for another family member actually. But what she found was that the symptoms were symptoms I had been showing all my life. Now, if you are familiar with the symptoms of Asperger's, you would have been able to tell right off the bat, if I were still a child, that I suffer from it, and to a pretty extreme degree. If you aren't aware, the main aspects of autism consist of trouble with personal interaction with other people, as well as repetitive behaviors and rituals, and the major symptom that is last would be obsessive nature, and specifically obsessing over one particular thing. Now, all three of these symptoms were majorly visible in my behavior as a child. They are still majorly a part of my personality and my being nowadays in my 20s. And the only difference is that I have only learned to conceal my obsessive behaviors more than I could when I was a child. Another minor symptom of it that I've had many people comment on would be the fact that I speak slowly and in a monotonous voice. However, this is also due to a diagnosis of schizophrenia that I have, and my voice has become more expressive since I've started antipsychotics. But this is not related to the whole autism situation, so I will not discuss that more in this video. But my relative brought up this conclusion to me that I was probably autistic when I was 17 or 18 years old. And so in response, I did some research and I looked into autism, and nearly, if not every single symptom resonated with me. It all matched my behavior and my thoughts as it did when I was a child. As a result, my family, now being told about this by my relative, agreed with the idea of me dealing with Asperger's, and I told this to my friends at the time, who seemed to agree as well. So after this, I decided to just keep it more to myself, but I did believe that I was autistic, which later got confirmed, and now I will go into the details of that. Now, the family member who originally brought up the idea of me being autistic to myself and the rest of my family, at the time, I had been looking for a job, and I was pretty desperate to find one because I had not been in classes and I had nothing to do with my time. So, this family member decided to go out of her way to try and help me with this. And one of the ways to do that was to contact an agency for people who were disabled looking for jobs, because I'd already gotten a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder or schizophrenic symptoms, as well as depression and some other illnesses. But along with these diagnoses, this family member brought up the idea that I may be autistic. And so their response was to allow me a psychological screening and a screening for autism by a psychologist. So I went to my meeting with this psychologist along with my father, and this psychologist screened me for autism, which mostly consisted of asking my father questions about myself, because I am not so good at self-analyzing, and I cannot recall many memories from my childhood, except for consistent ones such as my obsession with certain things, and my trouble having relationships with other people, or just communicating with other people. Now, I will specify that before I was screened for autism, I was not told I would be screened for autism. This came up without my knowledge, and I went along with it because, hey, I had been wanting a diagnosis if I actually dealt with it. And in the end, the psychologist came to determine that I was indeed autistic and dealt with specifically Asperger's syndrome. She was also one of the psychologists who came to conclude that I was indeed psychotic. So the dual diagnoses of these two things led to me being approved for this organization helping disabled people find jobs. And because of that, I was allowed help by a job coach and others to find a job simply because I had been deemed disabled enough. At this time, I had also been seeing my own personal psychiatrist for medication, of course, and bringing this up, she did not seem to have any arguments or objections to this diagnosis and agreed with it. Before this, I had actually been seeking out a diagnosis of autism from my previous psychiatrist, who in turn responded with, "Why do you feel you need this diagnosis?" and would not actually screen me for it or help me find someone who would. That psychiatrist, for other reasons, was actually not the right fit for me, so I stopped seeing him and later saw the psychiatrist I saw next. And all in all, the doctors who have seen me seem to all have the general agreement that my diagnoses fit. But all in all, that's about the story of how I found out I was autistic and how I received my diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. Maybe in another video I will go into detail on how autism affects me and how it manifests itself and what symptoms I show in particular, but what I have discussed in this would be the main story of how I got diagnosed and all. So, thank you all for watching and listening, and I will see you another day. So, goodbye.